On his first day as a taxi driver, Hyun-soo picks up a stylishly made-up woman. He's kind enough to drive her home, but she has no intention of paying. She uses her youthful charm to seduce him. They kiss passionately, get intimate, and quickly become one. What seems like a perfect night turns into a nightmare when Hyun-soo wakes up to find the woman stabbed 13 times, dead on the bed. Check out the Korean crime thriller, One Ordinary Day, to see what happens next. Hyun-soo is just an average high school senior. He's slaved away studying for college entrance exams, and he's ready for a bright future. But his friends invite him to a pool party, and Hyun-soo can't resist. He figures, why not? He's still a young guy, and if he can score with someone at the party, he might as well be a man before he even gets to college. So Hyun-soo accepts the invitation. After dinner, he changes his clothes. While his parents are watching TV, Hyun-soo sneaks off and grabs the keys to his dad's taxi. He figures he'll buy a raincoat, and saving a little on gas is fine. He even turns off the black box, so his dad won't know he's stolen the car to go to the party. He drives straight to the party, but while he's waiting at a red light, a beautiful girl gets into the back seat. Hyun-soo is going to refuse, but her looks changed his mind. A gorgeous girl is rare. When she flips her hair, there's a kind of irresistible pull on Hyun-soo. He's a teenager after all, and he quickly falls for her beauty. He drives her around the city. Suddenly, the car runs out of gas, and they have to stop for fuel. The girl lights a cigarette, and Hyun-soo tells her that smoking is prohibited at gas stations. But she doesn't care. She asks Hyun-soo to buy her a beer, and even throws her half-smoked cigarette out the window. Her attitude is incredibly arrogant and disrespectful. A guy at the gas station sees this and walks over to stomp out the cigarette butt. Hyun-soo comes back, and he drives the girl away from the station. Halfway there, his friends call to tell him there are tons of hot girls at the pool party. The girl in the back seat smiles knowingly, realizing Hyun-soo is a virgin. After Hyun-soo hangs up, she starts teasing him. They end up sitting by the Han River, enjoying the breeze, and even sharing some uppers. They even go buy ice cream and skip out on paying. Hyun-soo has always been a good kid, but right now, he's completely smitten with Guk-hwa. Hyun-soo was bored, so he took Guk-hwa home. Pulling into her apartment complex, he accidentally bumped into a car in front of him. The car owner, acting strangely calm, just waved them off. But once they were inside, the guy's face twisted into a creepy expression. Guk-hwa brought Hyun-soo to her apartment and pulled out a bottle of hard liquor. That's when Hyun-soo learned Guk-hwa was a rich kid, recently back from studying abroad. Her mom had left her this mansion after passing away. She used to have a roommate, but they'd had a falling out for some reason. Guk-hwa used her looks to get Hyun-soo riled up, drinking heavily with him. She offered him some kind of pill and then pulled out a knife. Guk-hwa told Hyun-soo to try it. Hyun-soo sees the provocative look in her eyes and finishes his drink. Hyun-soo isn't as skilled as Guk-hwa, and the knife ends up stabbing her palm. He quickly grabs something to stop the bleeding, but the pain seems to excite Guk-hwa, and she kisses Hyun-soo passionately. They kiss from the living room up the stairs, and then from the stairs into the bedroom. He moves forward, and she retreats, clinging to him. When Hyun-soo wakes up, he's confused and finds himself on the sofa. He stumbles back to his room to get dressed. He was planning to leave his contact information for Guk-hwa, wanting to explore their world together, but she doesn't respond. Hyun-soo casually touches her perfect back, but it's covered in a sticky, viscous substance. He flips on the bedside lamp, and the sight before him makes Hyun-soo's blood run cold. Hyun-soo panics and runs out of the house, intending to drive away, but he realizes he left his keys inside. He has to go back, but now the door is automatically locked. Hyun-soo is forced to bang on the window, and his careless arm gets cut by the glass, catching the attention of the old man next door. Hyun-soo grabs his keys, throws on his jacket, and looks at the knife and the blood on the table. He remembers playing a knife game with Guk-hwa. His fingerprints are still on the blade, so he wipes them clean with a tissue. Even then, Hyun-soo doesn't feel safe. He grabs the knife from the table and runs out of the house. Hyun-soo drives recklessly, and his erratic behavior catches the eye of a female police officer. She thinks Hyun-soo is drunk driving and pulls him over to use a breathalyzer. But just as Hyun-soo is about to blow, the machine runs out of battery. The police radio crackles to life with a call for backup. There's been a break-in at a house in the area, and all available officers are needed. The officer reluctantly takes Hyun-soo with her. As they drive past familiar landmarks, Hyun-soo can't help but feel a chill. He's back in the neighborhood near Guk-hwa's house. It turns out that when he went back inside for his keys, the old man next door found him suspicious and called the police. When they searched the house, they called for backup. Now Hyun-soo is back here. Sitting in the police car, Hyun-soo is terrified. Captain Park Sang, the lead investigator, notices him and asks the officer about the situation. Knowing Hyun-soo might have been drunk driving, he orders the officer to take him back to the station. On the way to the station, Hyun-soo overhears two officers discussing the case. They say the killer was ruthless, stabbing Guk-hwa a total of 13 times. Captain Park goes to the crime scene for a forensic examination, but finds no valuable clues. As he's leaving, he hears the car owner from yesterday talking to the police. He says Guk-hwa brought a man back to the house. Captain Park asks for specifics, and the man's description raises serious suspicions. Back at the station, Hyun-soo's heart is pounding. He was planning to run away, but he ran into the old man who reported the crime. Hyun-soo tries to avoid him, but the old man recognizes him and stares intently. Captain Park quickly returns to the station and notices Hyun-soo's evasive behavior. He tells the female officer to search Hyun-soo for anything suspicious, then starts piecing together the details of the case with another officer. When Captain Park said the suspect escaped in a taxi, an old man by the market interrupted. He said the suspect drove away himself. Captain Park then looked at Hyun-soo, the female officer who also found a knife on him. Faced with this, Hyun-soo immediately panicked, just repeatedly saying, "It wasn't me." The police quickly apprehended him and took him to the interrogation room. Captain Park personally questioned Hyun-soo, but Hyun-soo's answers weren't satisfactory. As a highly experienced officer who's dealt with countless criminals, he didn't believe Hyun-soo. He ordered the police to test Hyun-soo for evidence. Hyun-soo was stripped naked and sprayed with some kind of solution. After the police turned on the lights, lots of blood reaction marks appeared on his body. No amount of washing could remove that. I didn't kill her." He was quickly locked up. Seeing the other prisoner talking to his lawyer, Hyun-soo thought about getting a lawyer too. He asked a nearby officer for help, but they just mocked him. "You're saying you didn't kill anyone, right? Why get a lawyer if you didn't kill anyone?" Hyun-soo was speechless. Lawyer Shin Jung left after talking to his client, but remembering Hyun-soo's distraught look and feeling a sense of justice, he turned back. Lawyer Shin wanted to see if Hyun-soo was truly innocent. He introduced himself. After talking, he offered to represent Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo shook his hand. It was then Hyun-soo learned the girl he'd spent the night with was named Guk-hwa. Lawyer Shin visited the police and learned Guk-hwa had been stabbed 3 times, and all evidence pointed to Hyun-soo. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Returning to the jail, he seriously instructed Hyun-soo on 2 things. First, evidence and the truth didn't matter. What mattered was saying whatever benefited him. Second, to stay completely silent, not uttering a single word. Because Hyun-soo didn't understand the law, he could easily reveal information that would hurt his case. Hyun-soo again insisted he didn't kill anyone. Lawyer Shin told him that talking about the truth didn't matter now. Based on the evidence, the police already believed he was the killer, and they would find ways to convict him. A lawyer like him would do his best to reduce the sentence, to get him off. Lawyer Shin also mentioned Captain Park to Hyun-soo. He was a top-notch criminal investigator. He only believed in the evidence at the scene and would use tricks to catch any flaws in a suspect's statement. He would nail the suspects and put them in jail. While Lawyer Shin and Hyun-soo were talking, Captain Park also started investigating the case. First, he met the first witness and showed him a picture for identification. The person who went home with Guk-hwa the night before was Hyun-soo. Then he spoke with the female officer who checked Hyun-soo's blood alcohol content. She said his eyes were shifty and his behavior suspicious. Another officer mentioned Hyun-soo, asking if Guk-hwa was dead. All their testimonies were extremely unfavorable to Hyun-soo. Captain Park had the forensic examiner check. All the evidence pointed to Hyun-soo as the killer. Captain Park found a medicine bottle on the ground and, remembering Hyun-soo mentioning asthma, pocketed it. The police also called Guk-hwa's father. It turned out Guk-hwa and her father rarely saw each other after her mother died. They were only father and daughter on paper. After Guk-hwa's father agreed, the police performed an autopsy. Hyun-soo's parents also arrived at the police station. They were completely shocked by what happened to their son. Captain Park arranged a private room for them and secretly turned on a camera, monitoring their conversation to find more evidence. Luckily, Lawyer Shin arrived and stopped them just in time, preventing further suspicion. He had told Hyun-soo to stay silent, but Hyun-soo disobeyed and talked to his parents. Lawyer Shin angrily told Hyun-soo, "Talking to your parents, you're bound to reveal something. That video will be used as evidence, and I won't see it until it's shown in court. The police will have a head start." Captain Park was discussing the case details with the chief. The chief reviewed all the evidence, noting that while the evidence was clear, the suspect wasn't confessing. Captain Park said nothing. He was still hesitant about whether Hyun-soo was the killer, but the chief wouldn't let him waver. He mentioned a lawyer friend who had a high-end law firm and needed a seasoned hand to handle cases for the wealthy. So he introduced Captain Park. The chief wanted Captain Park to secure a conviction. This case was the best way to boost his reputation. After the chief's subtle pressure, Captain Park sped up the process of convicting Hyun-soo. He went back to the jail, gave Hyun-soo the medicine bottle, and then tried to build rapport, aiming to get Hyun-soo to confess. But thanks to lawyer Shin's advice, Hyun-soo wasn't naive anymore. He calmly said to Captain Park, "Isn't coercing a confession like this illegal?" Captain Park returned to his office, no longer hesitant. He decided to hand the case over to another officer, as per the chief's request. It must be said that Captain Park was ruthless. To pressure Hyun-soo into confessing, he deliberately made him change into a shirt from a well-known brand, making it harder for Hyun-soo to gain public sympathy and affecting the jury's judgment. But time was short, and lawyer Shin was at a loss. The trial began. The prosecutor listed numerous pieces of evidence, none of which favored Hyun-soo. The nature of the crime was too horrific to let Hyun-soo go free. Lawyer Shin began his defense, arguing that while much evidence pointed to Hyun-soo, other possibilities existed. Hyun-soo was a good student with no prior criminal record and no reason to flee. Therefore, before a thorough investigation, he shouldn't be held. The judge looked at the shirt Hyun-soo was wearing, leaning slightly towards the prosecutor. After careful consideration, the judge decided to jail Hyun-soo. That very night, in the wind and rain, Hyun-soo was given prison clothes and transferred to the penitentiary. His harsh life began. Hyun-soo was quickly assigned to a 3-person cell. His cellmates were Sang-soo, who loved to read, and a mentally unstable inmate nicknamed Chicken Cough. If you've ever seen a prison movie, you know the first night is rough. After the lights went out, his cellmates' panic attacks began, preventing Hyun-soo from sleeping. Hyun-soo later learned his cellmate wasn't mentally ill. He'd been beaten senseless by prison thugs. There were 2 gangs in the prison, the White Tiger Gang, led by Baek-ho, with Do-shik as his second in command. Sang-soo warned Hyun-soo to stay away from the White Tiger Gang at all costs. Otherwise, he'd face endless torment. And the Lion Gang, the White Tiger Gang's rivals. The Lion Gang had only 2 members, their leader, Ji-tae, and his underling, nicknamed Bonebreaker, for his ability to break bones. Ji-tae and Bonebreaker worked together, even running a contraband operation inside the prison. They could get you phones, cigarettes, or drugs, anything you wanted, for a price. Hyun-soo felt sympathy for Chicken Cough after seeing how badly Baek-ho had beaten him. When getting his asthma medication, he also grabbed pain relievers for Chicken Cough. But Hyun-soo didn't expect Baek-ho and Do-shik to find out. Do-shik immediately switched targets, turning his bullying towards Hyun-soo. Just as Do-shik and Baek-ho were about to attack Hyun-soo, a clear voice cut through the air. Ji-tae and Bonebreaker looked at them coldly. Baek-ho thought Hyun-soo had angered Bonebreaker and quickly led Do-shik away. Meanwhile, outside the prison, lawyer Shin was tirelessly working on Hyun-soo's case, starting his investigation. He'd heard that if Hyun-soo refused to confess, the police would pin other charges on him, things like drug use or assault. The police were targeting Hyun-soo, intending to keep him locked up for life. Lawyer Shin felt immense pressure. He went to Hyun-soo's home, discussing the defense strategy and demanding legal fees from his parents. Seeing their small house, lawyer Shin realized Hyun-soo's family wasn't wealthy and lowered his fees. After meeting Hyun-soo's parents, he realized they were even poorer than he'd imagined. No matter the price, they couldn't afford it. Lawyer Shin kept lowering his fees, but couldn't reach an agreement. Then he received news that the prosecutor was holding a press conference and rushed to meet her. Lawyer Shin argued that Hyun-soo couldn't be the killer because he and Go-kwa had only just met. He couldn't have committed such a brutal stabbing. The prosecutor disagreed, saying the killer's cruelty suggested it wasn't their first crime. Lawyer Shin accused the police of lacking substantial evidence and arresting Hyun-soo out of convenience. The police press conference quickly began. Hyun-soo's parents watched on TV. The prosecutor declared Hyun-soo a serial killer, even publicly showing his face. All the other inmates learned Hyun-soo was a cold-blooded murderer. Hyun-soo panicked and immediately called lawyer Shin. He replied that the next 10 days were crucial for the investigation, determining whether Hyun-soo would remain in custody. He told Hyun-soo not to worry, he'd keep searching for answers. Hyun-soo calmed down. After the call, lawyer Shin met reporters. In front of numerous cameras, he stated the police were abusing their power, convicting Hyun-soo without solid evidence. Lawyer Shin's interview aired live. Lawyer Mi-kyung saw it and immediately investigated Hyun-soo's address. Mi-kyung represented a large law firm. wanting to use Gukwa's case to enhance her reputation, essentially using it for publicity. Mai Kyung and her colleague, Soo Jin, visited Hyun Soo's parents, claiming lawyer Shin was a small-time lawyer while their firm was prestigious and staffed with top legal talent. Importantly, Mi Kyung said she felt sorry for Hyun Soo and would offer free legal representation. Hyun Soo's parents switched lawyers. The old couple were naive. They didn't realize that the cheapest option is often the worst. Hyun Soo's prison life was miserable. Since murderers were rare, the other inmates decided to act as judges. They hooded Hyun Soo with a black bag, taking him to a special room. They put a rope around his neck and hoisted him up. Hyun Soo struggled violently, but it was useless. Luckily, a guard walked by at that critical moment, saving Hyun Soo's life. Meanwhile, lawyer Shin continued his investigation, tricking the police surveillance into the scene of Gukwa's murder. Hoping to find more clues in the house, he found a man named Yoon Hyo connected to the case. Gukwa's apartment still had her delivery packages, but lawyer Shin didn't yet know he'd been replaced. He went to the market, bought underwear for Hyun Soo, and sent him money in prison. You need money in jail. But when Hyun Soo mentioned the lawyer change, lawyer Shin was speechless. The new lawyer was Mai Kyung, offering free representation. Lawyer Shin understood immediately. He wanted to say something but thought better of it. One day, Bone Breaker took Hyun Soo to a room. Ji-tae was sitting there smoking, and 5 inmates were kneeling nearby. Ji-tae had discovered someone secretly selling cigarettes behind his back, and wanted Hyun Soo to reveal who it was. Hyun Soo remembered seeing them make a deal on his way back to the cell, but didn't want trouble, telling Ji-tae he didn't know. But Ji-tae, a veteran inmate, saw through Hyun Soo's act. Ji-tae slowly approached, and Hyun Soo eventually revealed the person. As Hyun Soo left the room, he heard a terrible scream. That night, Hyun Soo woke up startled. Before he could shake off the nightmare, he saw Chicken Cough hanging from a rope. As the guards took Chicken Cough away, Do Shik looked at Hyun Soo, seemingly declaring him the next target. Terror shook Hyun Soo. He impulsively tried to escape, but a high school student had no chance. A guard quickly caught him and beat Hyun Soo severely with his baton. They held Hyun Soo down, beat him, and threw him into solitary confinement. Outside the prison, the prosecutor and Captain Park were discussing their plan. They intended to make Hyun Soo use a lie detector test. If he refused, it would suggest guilt. If the machine said he was telling the truth, it wouldn't matter. It couldn't be used as evidence. Essentially, it was risk-free for them. They quickly acted, taking Hyun Soo to a private room. The prosecutor threatened him, saying this was his last chance. I guarantee you, with the current evidence, you'll get at least life in prison. After some theatrics, the prosecutor mentioned the lie detector, saying it could clear his name. Captain Park chimed in. Prisoners hate murderers. If the lie detector says you didn't kill anyone, not only will you gain public support, but you might face less bullying in prison. Hyun Soo was no match for these 2 seasoned professionals. After some psychological manipulation, he quickly agreed to the lie detector test. Captain Park called lawyer Shin, informing him of the upcoming test. Knowing about the lawyer switch, he also called Mai Kyung. Mi Kyung was furious. Hyun Soo had agreed without consulting her, but it was done, so she sent Soo Jin to observe the situation. Although lawyer Shin was no longer involved in the case, hearing about the lie detector test, he knew Hyun Soo was in trouble. His wife was a researcher at the National Science Institute, where the lie detector test was conducted, so he used his wife's connections to get access to the lie detector beforehand. Captain Park and the prosecutor were still trying to trap Hyun Soo. While driving, Captain Park talked about Hyun Soo's misfortunes, then took him to see Gukwa's body, making him feel guilty. When Hyun Soo's asthma acted up, Captain Park took away his inhaler, saying he couldn't use any medication before the test. Even more absurd, the prosecutor's questions all assumed Hyun Soo's guilt. When you killed Gukwa, did you feel pleasure? The questions only allowed yes or no answers, making it seem like Hyun Soo was admitting to murder, no matter what. Captain Park even left the inhaler nearby to emphasize the pain. So Jin, a new lawyer, called Mi Kyung but got no answer. So lawyer Shin took Soo Jin to the monitoring room, teaching her how to use legal arguments to counter Captain Park, ultimately stopping the test. Lawyer Shin, meddling in other people's business, disrupted Captain Park and the prosecutor's scheme, saving Hyun Soo. But even though Hyun Soo was saved, he was severely beaten by the police. Back in prison, Do Shik beat him up, yelling, "You pathetic rapist, you dare act tough in front of me?" Even Ji-tae found Hyun Soo, giving him a book about repentance, and saying the trial was tomorrow. If he regained his freedom, great. But if he returned, he had to decide, continue being bullied by the White Tigers, or join the Lion Gang. The next day, at the trial, Ji-tae gave Hyun-soo glasses. Did you learn your lesson last time? Your appearance in court matters. Ji-tae told him to wear them. Looking neat and refined would make the public and judge more sympathetic. At the same time, lawyer Shin attended Gukwa's funeral. There, he saw a girl named Yoon Hyo. A photo from the crime scene gave him a new lead. Gukwa had a history of fentanyl use. Let me explain fentanyl for a second. It's a powerful painkiller and anesthetic. But depending on the dosage, it can be deadly. That's why many countries heavily regulate it. Hospitals can only use it on patients with a doctor's approval. Lawyer Shin, using social media clues, tracked down the hospital that supplied Gukwa with fentanyl. He then asked the doctor if they'd prescribed it to her. The doctor tried to give a vague answer, but lawyer Shin's legal expertise forced him to produce Gukwa's prescription. It turned out she'd been using drugs for 3 years. The second hearing came quickly. The prosecutor described Hyun-soo's actions as brutal raping Gukwa, and then killing her, saying the impact on society was significant, and that he needed to be held in custody pending review. But Mi Kyung argued the case needed further investigation, pointing out Hyun-soo's previously exemplary behavior. She emphasized his good academic record and model student status, insisting he posed no danger to society. Mi Kyung even had Hyun-soo show the judge his injuries, trying to argue he was a victim of abuse and that the detention should be dropped. But the prosecutor wasn't letting him go. She hammered on Hyun-soo's refusal to take a lie detector test and his attempted escape during the investigation, claiming that's why the police accidentally injured him. Hyun-soo tried to explain, but the prosecutor wouldn't give him a chance. Spotting a weakness in his defense, the judge was swayed and ordered continued detention. The prosecutor smirked in victory. Mi Kyung, furious, blamed Hyun-soo's escape attempt, threw the files at her assistant, and stormed off without looking back. Meanwhile, lawyer Shin stopped Soo-jin and gave her Gukwa's prescription. When Mi Kyung received the prescription information, a new plan formed, leaving Hyun-soo despairing as he returned to prison. Walking past a cellmate, Hyun-soo was scratched on the hand by his toothbrush. Hyun-soo immediately ran to the infirmary, but the staff had left for the day. Luckily, Ji-tae helped stitch up his wound. Ji-tae also used the opportunity to tell Hyun-soo that whether he was a murderer or not didn't matter. What mattered was surviving prison. Using the documents to negotiate, the prosecutor knew their importance. Mi Kyung wanted to use them to boost her reputation and advance her career, even aiming for prosecutor general. They made a deal. Ignoring the truth and focusing only on their self-interest, they decided on a 10-year sentence for Hyun-soo for manslaughter, with no appeal. This way, both Mi Kyung and the prosecutor could be seen as winners. Hyun-soo was the only one who suffered. The next day, Mi Kyung went to the prison, saying Hyun-soo could have faced life imprisonment or the death penalty. She'd gotten the best possible outcome. She then continued to manipulate Hyun-soo, saying 10 years seemed long, but it was the lightest sentence possible. He might be released in 3 or 4. Unable to withstand Mi Kyung's pleading, Hyun-soo finally agreed to plead guilty. After hearing Hyun-soo's decision, Shin-jung commented, "That sounds like a good deal, but the stain will last a lifetime. So lawyer Shin, what are you going to do?" Shin-jung replied, "I'll ask myself, did I kill anyone?" The trial began again. Mi Kyung, representing Hyun-soo, delivered the confession. As everyone waited for Hyun-soo's confession and its benefits, he surprised them all. "No, I didn't kill her." Now things were complicated. Mi Kyung felt betrayed, immediately withdrawing from the case and leaving everything to Soo-jin. Meanwhile, back in prison, Hyun-soo was taken by Baek-ho. Baek-ho threatened Hyun-soo again with a toothbrush, demanding 3 packs of cigarettes as protection money. Hyun-soo could only buy cigarettes from Ji-tae. They cost 200,000 won a pack, and he could only buy 1 a month. But Ji-tae made an exception, giving Hyun-soo 2 packs. 2 packs weren't enough for Baek-ho, who pushed Hyun-soo against the wall, threatening him with the toothbrush and cutting Hyun-soo's neck. He beat Hyun-soo again, demanding 2 more packs the next day, before swaggering off. To survive, Hyun-soo called his father for money and went back to Ji-tae for cigarettes. But Baek-ho found him again, demanding 2 packs of menthol cigarettes. He pushed Hyun-soo to the ground and began torturing him with the cigarette. Ji-tae intervened, saving Hyun-soo's arm and taking him to the infirmary. Afterward, he taught Hyun-soo how to survive in prison. Ji-tae then apprehended Baek-ho and forced him to apologize to Hyun-soo. Baek-ho was stubborn at first, underestimating Ji-tae. First, a brutal beating to the face. Then, his hands were burned in 200°C boiling water. Baek-ho couldn't take it, crying his heart out on the floor. Finally, the police arrived, but he was dragged into a dark, small room. All the officers were brought off by Ji-tae. Meanwhile, Sojin became Hyun-soo's lawyer, but she knew her limitations. Understanding she couldn't handle it alone, she reached out to Shin-jung for help. Shin-jung went straight to jail afterward. He told Hyun-soo to persevere, not to give up. This would be a long fight, and even a small glimmer of hope had to be seized. Giving up meant losing everything. Just as Hyun-soo got back to his cell, Ji-tae called him, saying his sister had to transfer schools because of bullying. And because his dad's taxi was impounded, he was now only able to make ends meet by delivering goods. Then Ji-tae told Hyun-soo he could help him with his problems. But Hyun-soo needed to do something in return. Without waiting for an answer, he injected Hyun-soo with a painkiller, pushed him onto the bed, rendering him immobile, and then broke one of Hyun-soo's arms. Ji-tae said, "All this is to get Hyun-soo to an outside hospital for treatment." Hyun-soo would soon return after his arm treatment, but then he was forced to remove his bandages. You might remember we mentioned fentanyl, a powerful clinical painkiller, but also a potentially deadly drug. Ji-tae was using the drug's components, dissolving and solidifying them to satisfy his drug habit. Meanwhile, Shin-jung went to his sister-in-law, asking for her help in investigating the crime scene. After all, his sister-in-law was a medical doctor working in a lab. The expert investigator's approach proved efficient, quickly uncovering valuable clues. At the same time, Park Sang and the prosecutor were actively preparing their cases. However, their investigative styles differed significantly. Park Sang only trusted hard evidence, so he investigated everywhere. The prosecutor, lacking informants, invited a man about to get married out for a barbecue, hoping to secure a conviction through connections. The next day, the trial resumed, this time using a jury system. Simply put, the strategy was to feign sympathy and win over the jury's hearts, securing a victory in the case. The prosecutor claims Hyun-soo raped, murdered, and then ran because he was scared of getting caught. She shows a picture of Guk-hwa's everyday life, trying to win the jury's sympathy. But Shin-jung isn't backing down. He shows pictures of Hyun-soo's life, pointing out how happy and energetic he looks in every single one. Shin explains to everyone that a cheerful guy with no criminal record, stabbing someone 31 times, just doesn't make sense. Seeing that neither side is winning, the prosecutor pulls out her trump card, the very same forensic scientist she had BBQ with last night, a guy with over 20 years of experience. He testifies that the knife wound on Guk-hwa's hand was inflicted by Hyun-soo, but Shin-jung pulls out the drug test results. 3 different drugs were found in Hyun-soo's system. Even the medical examiner has to admit these drugs, working together, could cause memory loss and pain suppression, so severe that Hyun-soo wouldn't even feel it if his leg was chopped off. Therefore, the wound on Guk-hwa could have another explanation. Just like that, the prosecutor's ace is neutralized. Frustrated, she slams her hand on the table, but quickly recovers. She calls a police officer to the stand to testify about a breathalyzer test, trying to prove Hyun-soo fled the scene out of guilt. But Sojin points out the officer's breathalyzer test was improperly administered and even had a dead battery. They couldn't prove Hyun-soo was drunk driving, yet they still arrested him. The prosecutor, not giving up, calls another officer to testify. This officer claims Hyun-soo asked if Guk-hwa was dead, implying he was only checking on her condition without any sympathy. Sojin counters, asking why that couldn't be interpreted as Hyun-soo showing concern. The officer glares and lies, insisting Hyun-soo's words didn't sound like concern. Then, Sojin plays a recording from the police car. It reveals the officer used Guk-hwa's winning lottery ticket. This twist shocks the jury, making them doubt everything the officer said. Desperate, the prosecutor plays her last card, Hyun-soo's high school teacher. The teacher testifies that Hyun-soo got into a fight in high school, even pushing a classmate down the stairs. The prosecutor brings this up to paint Hyun-soo as having violent tendencies, but she didn't anticipate that Hyun-soo only attacked the classmate because he was making fun of his poor family. Hyun-soo also expressed deep remorse afterward, apologizing and receiving forgiveness. Hearing this, the jury and the audience are moved, their sympathy shifting towards Hyun-soo. Sensing this shift, Sojin continues, arguing that many people in the courtroom today have made mistakes, but everyone makes mistakes. The police made a mistake arresting Hyun-soo and trying to pin a murder on him. It's unfair and unreasonable. The jury members nod in agreement. With Sojin's stellar performance, Shin-jung smiles, satisfied. The trial is adjourned. Back at his office, Shin-jung pulls out a photo of the crime scene. He knows Hyun-soo didn't eat the fruit on the table, and the knife found on Hyun-soo was the one Guk-hwa got from the kitchen. So where is the fruit knife that was on the table? Both Guk-hwa and Hyun-soo are using drugs. The doctor hasn't prescribed anything in the last 2 weeks, so where are the drugs coming from? Then Hyun-soo remembers. Gukwa mentioned fighting with her boyfriend a week ago. Adding that to the package found at the scene and Gukwa's social media, Shin Jung immediately figures out that Gukwa's friend is a woman named Yoon Hyo. Shin Jun quickly tracks down Yoon Hyo. At first, she's uncooperative, but an inexperienced nobody like her is no match for lawyer Shin. If you don't explain where the drugs came from, I'll call the police, and you could be brought in for questioning. Under Shin Jung's pressure, Yoon Hyo reveals the drug supplier, Gi Jong. Selling drugs is a serious crime, so naturally, Gi Jong wasn't going to confess easily. Shin Jung came up with a plan. He left his phone in Gi Jong's store while pretending to go out for a smoke. Timing it just right, he went back to retrieve his phone. And just as he'd hoped, he got Gi Jong on tape. Turns out, Gi Jong knew Yoon Hyo had talked the moment Shin Jung showed up, so he called her to complain. Shin Jung got the whole conversation recorded. He and So Jin then analyzed the recording and learned that Gi Jong used to be Yoon Hyo's boyfriend. But after a drunken night with Gukwa, Yoon Hyo cut ties with him. They thought they were tracking a murderer, but instead, they stumbled onto something connected to Gukwa's death. They could only continue to follow this new lead, hoping it would take them somewhere. At the same time, a group shows up at the prison, demanding to review the list of inmates released on medical grounds. They quickly zero in on Hyun Soo. Turns out, Hyun Soo was helping Ji-tae smuggle drugs. Because the doctor's arrest brought in the narcotics unit, they split into two teams. The captain takes charge of interrogating Ji-tae, while the lieutenant deals with Hyun Soo. The captain tells Ji-tae his goal is to catch Hyun Soo, and as long as Ji-tae cooperates, he'll be fine. Meanwhile, the lieutenant gives Hyun Soo a similar spiel, promising to let him go if he proves Ji-tae is the mastermind. But Ji-tae doesn't trust the captain one bit. He speaks to him with arrogance. 7 wardens have come and gone, but he remains untouched. Because everyone owes me favors. The narcotics captain is about to lose his temper, but suddenly gets a call from his superior, ordering him to back off. No doubt Ji-tae has bribed his superiors too. The lieutenant also reports back, saying Hyun Soo hasn't given up any information. After the narcotics team leaves, Ji-tae looks at Hyun Soo with admiration. So he uses his connections to get Hyun Soo's father's impounded taxi back. Ji-tae even gives Hyun Soo a cell phone to confirm it. After hearing his father's confirmation, Hyun Soo is relieved and expresses his awe at Ji-tae's power. Ji-tae then hands the phone over to Hyun Soo, telling him to call his dad whenever he wants. Over on lawyer Shin's side, he checked the security cameras and found that on the night of the murder, a man was constantly following him and Gukwa. When they went to the riverbank to relax, the man stood nearby and never left. Lawyer Shin and Soo Jin investigated and found out that this guy, whose last name was Lee, was a delivery driver. They rushed to the delivery company and discovered he had a history of assault and was currently wearing an electronic ankle monitor. The company found out about this and fired him. The trial date arrived quickly, and lawyer Shin and Soo Jin split up. She was responsible for attending the trial, while lawyer Shin went to track down this Lee guy. He went to an abandoned junkyard, found the guy, and confronted him directly. Security camera footage shows the guy following Hyun Soo and Gukwa the night of the crime. Plus, he had a prior criminal record, so the police were going to hit him with a heavy sentence. The lawyer kept pushing him, and the guy grabbed an axe nearby and threw it. But the lawyer wasn't. He just demanded the guy testify in court. You gotta hand it to him. This lawyer's got serious ethics. He risked his life to get an innocent person cleared. Luckily, he called the police before he went. So when the guy went for him again with a machete, the cops were right there. The police tried their best to catch him, but in court, Park Sang said, "You had 3 chances to confess, but you kept dodging the question. That shows you're an excellent liar." He went on, "Your actions that night looked like you were hunting someone to kill." The guy, usually calm, got riled up. He walked right into Park Sang's trap. He reacted angrily, completely losing his cool. The prosecutor saw his increasingly agitated reaction and noticed his slip-ups. She used a provocative tactic, urging him to talk to Park Sang. "You could have refused, but all your pent-up anger exploded right then." Finally, he sat in the witness box and faced the prosecutor. The judge had changed things up from the last hearing, and he was completely on the defensive this time. The prosecutor relentlessly attacked him. She pointed out that he claimed to be honest and upright, yet he stole his dad's car without a license. And instead of calling the police after witnessing a murder, he destroyed the crime scene and ran. If you'd called the police, you might have saved Gukwa. What right do you have to claim innocence? Remembering Gukwa's mangled body, a wave of crushing guilt washed over him, and his defenses crumbled. The prosecutor pressed him. "Did you kill her?" The guilt was suffocating. and the alcohol he'd drunk the night of the incident made it hard for him to remember anything clearly. His initially firm denials wavered and became unclear. The verdict was clear. More and more people believed he was the murderer. When lawyer Shin called Soo Jin for an update, she cried and apologized, saying it was all her fault. If she had been able to control him, things wouldn't have turned out this way. After hearing this, lawyer Shin went to jail to visit him. He told him not to feel guilty. It wasn't his fault. Gukwa was stabbed 3 times. She was already dead at the scene. There was no chance of saving her, even if you had called the police then. Seeing his despair, lawyer Shin knew this case was a tough one. In the prison mess hall, he saw news reports about him, and other inmates started mocking him cruelly, calling him a monster in a human mask, a beast in man's clothing. He could only hide to release his anger and frustration. But Baek-ho saw him and immediately came over to taunt him. "Don't worry, 30 years will fly by." The guy pulled out a white phone and showed it off. Immediately, something felt wrong. He searched his belongings and found his phone, which he'd hidden, was gone. Baek-ho had stolen it. He confronted Baek-ho, demanding his phone back, but instead of returning it, Baek-ho beat him up. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for Baek-ho. The next day, in the mess hall, his cellmate, Lee, deliberately avoided sitting with him. That's when it hit him. Lee, who seemed friendly and helpful, had betrayed him. He couldn't understand. Lee must have told Baek-ho about the phone. The trial hadn't gone well, and now he'd been betrayed by his cellmate. He felt completely hopeless, turning darker and more cynical. Finally, he worked up the courage to reach out to Ji-tae, hoping for help. Ji-tae shared his own story. A model student with excellent grades, wrongly implicated in a college brawl, and forced to take the blame. No one believed him. He and the inmate shared the same pain and despair. Ji-tae had even considered suicide, but before he did, he realized he was in control of his own life. Seeing the inmate reminded him of his younger self, which is why he'd been so helpful. He offered him a cigarette, saying that to survive, he had to improve himself. Without hesitation, he took the cigarette, and finally, he was completely consumed by darkness. From that day on, he and Ji-tae started eating together. The Tiger Gate became a group of 3, Ji-tae, Hyun-soo, and Do-shik. The 3 of them formed a stunning sight, and even when facing Baek-ho's gaze, he didn't even bat an eye. To stop being bullied, he started training his body and doing push-ups every day. Under Ji-tae's guidance, he also trained hard in boxing to improve his fighting skills. That night he called home. His sister cried, telling him that because of him, their mom had been kicked out. She had also transferred schools because of bullying. Now, they had lost everything in the village. His sister yelled at him, asking why he didn't speak up in court. He couldn't answer. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but no one believed him. The next day, he called his mom, but she kept ignoring his calls. He was incredibly disappointed. All he could do was train in boxing to release his frustration. That day, Baek-ho came to challenge him again, but this time, he didn't back down. Ji-tae also stepped forward and told him that whether he won or lost, it had to end. Otherwise, it would never truly be over. He went back to his room and cut his hair short. He didn't hesitate anymore. He went to the place where they had agreed to fight, but this time, he wouldn't take any more losses. He turned off the lights in his room. When Baek-ho arrived and turned the lights on, he punched him in the head. Then, they fought fiercely. He poured all his anger and resentment into every blow. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches, 4 punches. Baek-ho was knocked to the ground and couldn't get up. He had wanted to use a vase to hit Baek-ho, but he ultimately spared his life. Meanwhile, Sang Byum ordered Young Chan's release. Lawyer Shin was furious when he heard the news, because Chief Park still believed that Young Chan was the real murderer and hadn't investigated anything before releasing him. But there's another court hearing, and he intentionally shows up to testify. Lawyer Shin reveals that he once broke into a famous house with the intention of humiliating someone, and he has a criminal record, including a conviction for attempted murder. He's always been following Hyun-soo and Gukwa, and when the murder happens, there's no evidence of his innocence. His ankle monitor is even off, clearly making him a suspect. But Park Sang and the prosecutor don't care about any of that. They're still fixated on him. After the hearing, thanks to Ji-tae's behind-the-scenes actions, his cell is moved next to Ji-tae's. The next day, another intense court hearing begins. This time, Lawyer Shin calls Mrs. Shin to the stand. Mrs. Shin raises new doubts. First, the lock on Gukwa's balcony was broken, meaning someone could have entered without permission. Second, the murder weapon, a knife, was never found at the crime scene, so it can't be definitively proven that it was used. She also points out a large scratch on the table, suggesting Gukwa enjoyed cutting herself. Even more importantly, By analyzing the 3 stab wounds on Gukwa's body, it can be determined that the killer was right-handed, while Gukwa was left-handed. This doesn't match up with the killer's profile. The prosecutor, embarrassed and angry, starts attacking Mrs. Shin, implying that she's biased because of her relationship with lawyer Shin. But Mrs. Shin responds generously, saying, "I'm here to tell everyone that the police report is too biased, ignoring other possibilities and fixated on a single theory. As a professional, I'm simply expressing my dissenting opinions. I urge the judge and jury to consider all angles." After this trial, Dushik also gave him a tattoo. He suddenly appeared beside Ji-tae and asked, "Do you believe I didn't kill her? What if I'll do it?" He was curious how Ji-tae would react, but Ji-tae simply said, "I don't care if you killed her or not. Just knowing you're okay is enough." This was the first time he heard an answer other than guilty or innocent. Since following Ji-tae, he'd changed a lot, but he'd also walked into greater danger. It turned out Baek-ho, despite losing their fight, still harbored resentment towards him. So he sought out Big Tiger for help in getting revenge. Big Tiger took him to a secluded location to settle things. Suddenly, he found himself kneeling on the ground, ready to sever one of Ji-tae's arms as atonement. You can't deny Baek-ho was outwardly strong, but inwardly hollow, only bullying those weaker than him. Learning Hyun-soo had grown stronger, he immediately went to Big Tiger for assistance. But at the critical moment, Ji-tae and Dushik suddenly appeared. He stepped in front, delivering a powerful slap to Baek-ho before pulling him away. They all hesitated to retaliate, but Ji-tae warned him to be careful, as he could be targeted by someone else, especially those backing Baek-ho. During the next court session, lawyer Shin focused on Gukwa's stepfather, as he would inherit her assets after her death and receive her insurance payout. He was arguably the biggest beneficiary of this case. But when the stepfather is investigated, he's found with his girlfriend, with clear evidence of an alibi. Lawyer Shin then brings up the cheating husband. He wasn't there randomly. He'd been showing up at that location every day for a week. Plus, he lacks an alibi, making him a potential suspect. However, he confesses in court that he was infatuated with Gukwa's friend, Yoon Hyo. He was even fined by the police for stalking her. Yoon Hyo confirms this, leaving the defense in a dead end. So Jin and Ji-tae spend the night poring over case files, and finally find another breakthrough, an asthma inhaler discovered at the crime scene. So during the next court hearing, lawyer Shin demands the case files from Captain Park. He criticizes Park Sang for his biased handling of the case. He points out that Ji Jong's drug dealing, Lee's criminal record, Gukwa's stepfather's potential motive, and Gukwa's ex-boyfriend's suspicious behavior were all ignored. All of these individuals had strong reasons to be investigated, but the police were determined to pin the crime on Hyun-soo. Park Sang stated he operates by principle, basing all his actions on evidence. So lawyer Shin followed up, saying, "If you wanted to discuss evidence with me, why is there an asthma inhaler in the crime scene photos, but it's missing from the evidence list?" Park Sang explained he saw the defendant was distressed, so he gave him the inhaler. Lawyer Shin countered that if he was sick, he should have been taken to the hospital immediately, not given something so crucial. As a detective with over 30 years of experience, Park Sang couldn't possibly be unaware of this, so he had reason to doubt the accuracy of other evidence presented by the police. This breakthrough was effective. The jury was overwhelmingly on his side, but even then, the prosecutor, knowing the police messed up, still insisted he was a murderer and demanded the death penalty. After many court sessions, Gukwa's case finally reached a verdict. Ji-tae felt he didn't belong in prison, believing he could be proven innocent and released. So, he gave him a new phone. Not saying goodbye because forever saying goodbye is the best blessing you can give. That night, lawyer Shin racked his brain over the final arguments of the trial, because he knew every word he said tomorrow could change his fate. The next day in court, both sides gave their final statements, and the jury delivered their verdict, finding him not guilty and recommending his release. But just as everyone erupted in joy, the judge suddenly announced that the jury's opinion was merely a suggestion. Since there were no other suspects, and a lot of new evidence had surfaced, the judge overruled the jury and found him guilty of murder, sentencing him to life in prison. The trial had been long and cold, with repeated hearings and a struggle to gain the jury's acceptance. But then, out of the blue, the judge dismissed the jury's opinion, effectively pushing him toward death. Back in prison, he told his parents not to bother visiting or saying anything. He was utterly disillusioned with life, planning to spend the rest of his days behind bars. Ironically, the prosecutor got his wish and was promoted to a higher position. Park Sang also retired as an esteemed director. Ji-tae comforted him, saying that the Korean legal system was only for the wealthy and powerful. Without money, connections, or influence, justice was impossible to obtain. He resigned himself to his fate, but cruel fate wasn't finished with him yet. Baek-ho, seizing Ji-tae's momentary distraction, lunged with a toothbrush, fatally stabbing him. The shocking turn of events left everyone stunned. Before dying, Ji-tae urged him not to seek revenge, but to persevere and never give up, for only through perseverance could hope be found. Ji-tae was gone, Do-shik was left crippled, and the three were now alone. It seemed like the ordeal was finally over, but the story took a sudden turn. Lawyer Shin, after reviewing the video countless times, finally discovered a crucial piece of evidence. The man who had an affair used a camera to secretly take many photos at Gukwa's house. So, he went to confront the cheater, saying, "I've already turned all the photos over to the police." He had to go to his police friend to get those photos back. It wasn't easy. That's when the suspect started to emerge, and it turned out to be the doctor who prescribed medicine for Gukwa. He then looked at Gukwa's phone records and confirmed that the last number she called was the doctor's. He immediately suspected the doctor was the culprit, but Gukwa's trial was already over. If he kept appealing, it would be like slapping the judge in the face. Both the police and the prosecutor couldn't help him reopen the case, so he turned to Park Sang, who was retired, and laid out everything he had investigated. Park Sang didn't really want to get involved, but when his grandson suddenly ran up to him, Lawyer Shin beside him said emotionally, "Your children are precious. So are the children of others." Maybe it was because of his guilty conscience that Park Sang went to see the prosecutor. After some discussion, they decided to overturn the case and investigate it again. Gukwa's case was reopened, and it turned out she had been having an affair with the doctor. After finding out the doctor was married, Gukwa wanted to break up. When he saw Gukwa with another man, the doctor murdered her to frame Hyun-soo. Thanks to Lawyer Shin's efforts, he was finally declared innocent and released. But the most shameless person was the prosecutor. She used Gukwa's case to climb the ranks, and now claims she's doing it for justice, continuing to investigate even though the case is closed, just to gain more fame and profit. Alright guys, that's a wrap on this movie. This twisted story is a real satire of the South Korean justice system. It's only 8 short episodes, but it moves so fast. A true masterpiece if you ask me. It highlights the fact that wherever there's light, there's shadow. Dark justice exists in every country. We see it in parts of South Korea, like what happened with the Floyd tragedy here in the US, or even with Sun Xiaoguo in China. But the thing is, we gotta remember that even when we see darkness, there's always a light somewhere. Hyun-soo had some bad luck with Park Sang and the prosecutor, but he also got lucky to meet lawyers Shin and Soo Jin,